coming on this warm afternoon. Appreciate you being here. I want to be sure that you have an opportunity to meet and hear Ryan Loofbourrow speak about homelessness in the Sacramento area. His plan, he is the executive director of Sacramento Steps Forward.
Step up.
One or two. And their plan is to end homelessness in Sacramento by 2020.
Plan.
And so see where they're going, what they're doing, and how that might apply to us, and how we might benefit from that. So, Ryan, I leave you with this assemblage. Watch out for this guy coming in.
Then I will sit down.
Is he going to use the microphone?
No, I'll be okay. Thank you, though. Do you need me to use the microphone?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Where's the microphone?
So does everybody in the room.
Just
Push underneath it.
You got it.
Everybody in the room needs you to use the microphone.
Okay. Test. Test. I was too much. Heard my voice louder.
Is there a power switch, Steve?
I think Brian's hitting the power switch.
Ah.
We'll see what our IT guy can do right there.
Okay.
Batteries.
Test.
All right. Good.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, it didn't get any cooler as I was driving up from Sacramento, but it's great to be here. The presentation I have today is meant to just illustrate what we're doing in Sacramento, but really it's information that we've gathered nationally to implement a program that we believe in. And it's one that, as you look at it for your community, to consider, and to consider what it might mean to your community and how certain roles that you may or may not have currently, you might satisfy in a unique way to your community. So, my name is Ryan Loofbourrow. My background actually is not in direct homeless services. If anyone's ever heard of a property-based improvement district, a PBID, I was the operations director for the Downtown Sacramento Partnership for 18 years. And I went down to San Diego and ran their operations for another 2.5. And I tell you, everything I did, whether it was putting a hanging planter on a pole or washing a sidewalk or running a security team, was complicated by individuals that were homeless. And it was infuriating because I'd get those calls for all the good work we did. Those were the calls I got every day. And so early on, I started to look at solutions to homelessness. First, my solution was just get rid of them, right? Let's just push them out. And I think all of us in PBID work back in the 90s, that was the tactic. If we enforce enough laws and we have them arrested enough times, they'll just leave the district. The truth is, when you are in a place of homelessness, you have no place else to go. And so I quickly learned that that wasn't the best approach. And there was a gentleman, Tim Brown, that was executive director for Frozen Fishes. And Tim is a very patient individual, and he kind of took me under his wing one day after a meeting and said, I'd like you to just try something. And I said, all right, Tim, what do you want me to try? And he says, I'd like you to employ an outreach worker to work with people and try to get them into housing. And I was like, Tim, that's not going to work. So just to spite him in a certain way, I said, fine, I'll hire an outreach worker. So I took one of my guys that works security, one of my ambassadors, J. Vance Stewart, and I made him a navigator, we call him. And so him and Alexei Kishkovsky was the other guy. And there was a woman outside my office. She generated about 3 calls a day for me. She was severely mentally ill, very loud. They removed the park bench because she would urinate on it. And so I said, go ahead and start with her. Again, kind of a spiteful thing. I was going to prove to Tim that this was not going to work. We're not going to hug our way out of this situation. Well, they went out and started working with her, and I'm telling you, it does not always work out this way. And her name was Betty. And so they made inroads with Betty. And she was willing to go inside if they could pay for it. So we had a single room occupancy hotel, they had a vacancy, and Tim said, I'll pay for it. So we got her in the room. And then all of a sudden she had family. And we got her some medical care that she needed. And she left that SRO, went back to live with family. I was blown away. I also had less calls. And I said to my staff, we're going to do that again and a lot more on a grand scale as often as we can, because that worked. I didn't have the issues. She had the care that she needed. She was back with family and friends. So at that point, and that was in the early 2000s, I really got interested in how can this work in a systemic level. I was infinitely frustrated with continuum of care. I couldn't get the data that I wanted. So we plugged along with outreach and placement. And then a few years ago, I got a call. I was working down in San Diego to come up and run Sacramento Steps Forward. And it was a great opportunity because we had about 5 staff members at the time. And when I got up there, it was, we also had a 10-year plan that I was part of, that we just hadn't put all the pieces together. So over the last 2 years, the staff has grown from 5 to 36, and we have a robust outreach team. And I'll go through kind of the game plan that we're following, that we're implementing there in Sacramento. So I like to start with this picture because I think when you start working with an individual that's experiencing homelessness, there is sometimes a sense of lost hope, that you just can't get there from here. And so part of what you're doing is to create that connection, just one person to another person. And all of these individuals, with the exception of a couple on the right, were all homeless at one time. And this was a job fair, and all of them were employed on this day. So I want to do that with you, because I think when I talk to community, a lot
One
of
of
times...
Bo's lawyers sent a letter to Donald Trump about a week and a half.
That may complicate life. So, these folks did make it to self-sustainability. I want to impress upon you that it is possible. It is not easy, and it is one person at a time, as frustrating as that might be. But we have to have a system that's in place so that we can weigh and measure our results, so that we can get the greatest output of our efforts, and we can gain efficiency. So the goals that are set, we receive, HUD is our primary funder for housing assistance. And in Sacramento, we received just over $18 million. My office manages 12.4 of those $1 million. We are the collaborative applicant. My staff puts together that application. We work with our continuum of care. Continuum of care, for those that aren't familiar with the term, when I use it on the homeless front, is the collection of agencies that provide the housing and services to match for those experiencing homelessness that we've placed. And then we have other partners that complement that effort. So HUD says if you're going to use our money, there's certain goals we're going to set for you. You're going to hit this mark that we call functional zero. There was a day when we said we were ending homelessness. And for some reason, for the advocate, they said you can't get there from here, you can't end homelessness. And for my most staunch developers, they said that's a foolish venture, you can't do it. All right, so we met in the middle. Functional zero means that we admit that people will experience homelessness, but at some point we will have enough housing and services to match, both for the current size of the population and our inflow. And so when we look at our subpopulations, and that's how we look at our homeless population, that's the goal, that's success. If we can, for veterans at that point where I know how many are on my list, I know my monthly inflow, and I have enough housing and services to match that point. So that being said, in 2015, the goal was to hit functional zero for veterans by the end of this year for chronically homeless, and by the end of 2020 for families and transition age youth, and that's 18 to 24 years old. Now, veterans, when we use the point in time count, how many people did point in time count here in this area? Okay. It's a great community activity. I spent $130,000 to put it together in SAC. We have 400 volunteers. I task every officer to mark on a map where everybody's at. And 5 minutes after the report comes out, everybody goes, that can't be right. All right. And they're probably right. Because my experience, we watched that point in time count. I had 2,659 individuals. Just over 900 of them were under the stars homeless, unsheltered. So, point in time count numbers, that's all we had at the time when we set the mark for how many veterans we'd have to house. It was 668. And within a 12, 15, 14 month period, we hit that mark. And I still had over 200 veterans on my list. So, and we'll go through, when I talk about a list, how we've developed that list and what it means. So, nationally, and many of you may already be familiar with these numbers, we have, and this was from 2015's annual homeless assessment report, 564,000 individuals. These numbers are from that point in time count, so it represents a bare minimum. There is 115,000 in California. We typically are about 21% of the nation's homeless are here in California. About a third of the most chronically homeless here in California. In Sacramento, there's that number, 2,659. 948 were unsheltered. 24% were chronically homeless. And for us, chronically homeless means they had a diagnosable disability, they've been homeless for a year, or they've had 4 episodes in 3 years that were the equivalent of a year's worth of homelessness. 0.18% is our homeless population compared to the size of Sacramento, which is on par with the national numbers. I'm kind of skeptical of them because these are point in time count numbers and they're very low compared to what we're finding besides the population to actually be. Our numbers, when I'm looking at it, and you will do the same when you look at your point in time count to see if there's been fluctuation, because as soon as you do your point in time count, every media resource, everybody, that's what they use. Applications for grants, those are the numbers typically that are used. And you'll see on that first chart, the bottom row says total homelessness. For us, it hasn't changed very much. So this may mean a few things. It may mean that when 400 people go out and count for 6 hours, that's just as many people as 400 people can count. Or it might mean that our system accommodates for a certain amount of inflow, and as a result, this is just the remaining amount. That's what we can expect. This is as much as our system can absorb, and as a result, this is how many people we have, because there's not much fluctuation in that line. So currently, 2,659. And I venture to guess, when we do the count in 17, it's going to be higher, because one, we have increased our outreach. We have better intelligence about where people are, and I think as the economy gets better, we have more inflow from middle class. It's often said, where are these homeless coming from? They travel all over the place. They end up in our city. Truth is, I think middle class travels. Middle class is leaving San Francisco. They're leaving Seattle. They're coming up from San Diego because it's affordable to live here. And as they come in, they start to buy up areas that were once affordable. The creative class stays. When I worked in PBIDS, what I'm describing to you was exactly what we were working toward. We wanted people to move to Sacramento. I want my creative class to stay. Now I'm on the flip side of that. Creative class is renting every one of the apartments I would use now to place people into housing. And those that are moving into Sacramento are refurbishing rental units and owning them. These are some of the numbers that came out of the point in time count, and these are good just benchmarks to see how things are going. Chronically homeless, it was 7.9%. Veterans was at 313 on that night, and I just said that we've housed over 668 by March. April is well over 700. We're housing at a rate of 44 a month. My inflow is about 55. It's a little lopsided right now. It wasn't later last year. So we're taking some measures to restrict inflow and increase our housing placement. Some of these, and I put these up here because I want you to be aware of it. There's always going to be a guy like me talking about data like this, and you're going to look at it and say, wow, they reduced chronic substance abuse by 44%. No, we just asked the question different. Right? So HUD, the years prior, said, ask the question, do you use alcohol or controlled substances? And people said, yes, I do. The next time we asked it, it was asked, do those substances prevent you from sustaining a job and housing? That's a much different answer, right? So as you look at data that comes off point in time counts, make sure you ask the deeper questions about, was there any change in how HUD has directed you to ask the question, to really see if it's just a matter of surveying or if there's actually an impact in community. And also, we did not have an explosion of 485% of transition age youth. We just partnered with our transition age youth service providers. And they educated us on how to go out and do a proper count. We had transition age youth lead some of those teams that were transition youth as a team to do the interviews, and our outcomes were much better. So the primary principle that we are employing, and it's HUD's requirement if you're going to spend their dollars, is to use housing first. The only thing I don't like about this name is it's a misnomer. It sounds like I'm just going to put you in a house and walk away. You do that, and it's a failure. You have to have the services to match. So when I say housing first, you think housing first, yes, placed in a house first, but then the services have to be there to support the individual. Housing first is not one that I would have thought to subscribe to back in the day when I first started. It felt like somebody's getting something for nothing. But I will tell you, as I worked with individuals that were most chronically homeless in downtown urban environments, which typically in my mind have some of the most issues with addiction and mental health issues, they sustain life based on the sympathy of the population walking by. They're not well coordinated in canyons and riverbeds. So for that population, this Housing First works very well. There's not a requirement of programs up front where you qualify then for housing. You move right in, services are there if you need them and want to take advantage of them. Certainly it's behavior driven, so if someone is destructive or a danger to neighbors, that's a different issue. But we've had very good outcomes nationally with this model of Housing First. All right, so of all the things we'll talk about, this model is probably the most important. I think, at least in Sacramento, and I know it's the case in many continuums, we operated much like a hospital without a triage. So individuals experiencing homelessness would have to seek out the place that would offer them housing, and that agency would then qualify them for entry into their program. One, I would have to have enough wherewithal to find a place. And then I'd have to have the motivation and the access to transportation to get there. Already, you've stopped serving a portion of your population. You also are making a determination by a single agency on who's going to access services. So you don't have as a system, as one coordinated effort, you don't have consistency. Because what I, as one agency, consider to be chronically homeless and deserving of the vouchers and the services I have may be different than the next agency. And when I'm applying for grants from HUD, then my outcomes are going to be all over the place. And honestly, so too will be the results on the street, because your hardest to serve are likely to stay on the street when those that may get better outcomes are served within a system. So to address that, we put in a triage. So we have what's called a vulnerability index. The vulnerability index is that tool that allows you to start to sort out your population, give prioritization to need. No longer is a person going to be placed because they got there first. They're going to be placed because they are of highest need. And I know that's a big systems change, a lot of culture change in what I'm suggesting. So how do you get out to those folks that are of highest need? For me, I like boots on the ground. And it's probably because I used to run operations. I like maintenance workers and cops, and I like outreach workers. I like to meet people right where they're at. So we started to get contracts with the County of Sacramento. They have folks that are working in their district. We have in the City of Sacramento, now Folsom, Rancho Cordova, the library system, light rail. And these are individuals that are at a peer level. They're not licensed clinical social workers, but they have that mom quality. So I always get asked, well, how do you hire these people? I said, I'm looking for my mom. Because my mom, no matter what I do, loves me. No matter how I screw up, she's still like, all right, you're going to get this right, but I'm back with you. So I need those principles and these kind of peer relations. And I have two individuals, Tracy and David, who have given me permission to share their story or their background a little bit. Had both been homeless for a minimum of 8 years. And, you know, they're great examples of a lot of times we think, there's a person, we just can't reach them, they don't want to go in. Tracy and David were like that years 1 through 6, 7. It takes that person to meet them where they are, to start that conversation, create a relationship, that sense of hope before they're able to start to consider this opportunity of housing. They are in the field. We have the vulnerability index interview that's electronically based, so we can conduct it on an iPad. So it's a decentralized model. In Utah, it's centralized in an 800-person shelter. Everybody gravitates to one spot. I find those very hard to cite in an urban environment, and I actually like the decentralized model because you're meeting people right where they're at. We do the intake. That information comes right up into our office, into a computer, and it automatically sorts out the population. Highest need at the top, frankly closest to death at oftentimes. At the bottom, highest functioning. That information allows us to make determinations on where we're going to place. Each one of our housing providers has signed an MOU with us that they're going to take their referrals and placement from our coordinated entry system. This has just become fully implemented within the last few months, so it's even new to us. Let me tell you, it's not easy, it's complicated, there's all sorts of issues. And what you start to find out is why you have so many people homeless. Because you make referrals and they come straight back, like, why'd you send them back? Well, the property owner said they had too many convictions, evictions, was mentally ill, all those things, all the barriers to housing. Like, well, how is this going to work if I can't even get people into the apartment when I've got the services? So it's actually a great problem to have, right? Because now I've identified the problem that's actually been preventing us from getting people housed. I like to solve that problem. So this coordinated entry is kind of the key, the linchpin to getting things coordinated. And we started making referrals. In the middle is where usually community conversations are, right? So let's have a tent city. Let's build more shelters. Let's warehouse more people. And the conversation needs to be, we need more housing to get people in, and I need employment so they can self-sustain. The nice thing about this model, it starts to show people where they lie. So oftentimes when I work downtown, I hear chief of police say, it's not my job to address homelessness. It's not my job to solve homelessness. You can't arrest it away. Everything's true. All of that's true. But their job is to work alongside this crisis intervention and the outreach. We embed our outreach workers right alongside officers. Officers know where people are. They have the best technology. They have hot maps that come out that show the concentration of calls for service. We use all that as intelligence when we go out to try to do outreach. When I start looking at where's the city council going to start to help out? City of Sacramento, We needed a triage moment where we have 24-hour access to folks that we're working with. It allows us to get them document ready and do heavier case management. So they now are funding in partnership with Sutter Health to make our shelter systems 24 hours and that they're fully up to capacity. So there are some beds within shelter systems that may surprise you are permitted, but they're not operational because there weren't funds to make them operational. So they're going to make them whole and make them 24 hours so we have a greater opportunity to work with clients. And out here on the housing component, I love getting my city council and my board of supervisors focused on that. Otherwise, they're focused on everything else. They're just focused on the policing, they're just focused on the shelter and the calls for service. I need them focused on getting the housing in place so that this pipeline works efficiently and correctly. Coordinated exit is unique to the Sacramento model. I have not seen that in other areas, and that simply means I want to start connecting people to jobs. I want them to have self-sufficiency. It also means good partnerships with your housing authority, so that using your housing choice vouchers as exits from permanent supportive housing, so that you're using prioritized lists, which now our queue can act as that prioritized list to place people into public housing. This is just a list of where we have our outreach workers. So under the PBIS, Property-Based Improvement Districts, I've got 4.5 full-time employees. They contract with us directly, with the exception in this image of Mac and Florham. That's actually funded out of the county. But the others come right out of their funds and from their assessment. Local governments, I've got City of Sacramento, County of Sacramento, City of Folsom. I got county twice. And then Rancho Cordova is the other. Hospitals have Sutter and Dignity. Dignity actually funds for mental health outreach through an organization called TLCS. And in our continuum, they provide the mental health housing. Central Library, Sac Regional Transit, and then Win Youth works with Transition Age Youth. And then we need to make this outreach a little more robust. On the back end, there's a pairing for this outreach. The peer outreach workers are great, but you really do need case managers that work at maybe a higher level to really start to work with folks in a sometimes more meaningful way to really get them connected to services, get the documents in place, that type of thing. And so we're going to start putting more case management within now that 24-hour shelter experience. This is just an image to illustrate the index that we do. So it just has your high need at the top, low at the bottom. The programs that we're plugging them into are permanent supportive housing, meaning that's going to be their last placement, likely. It better be a person that has that highest need, that really could not self-sustain for themselves. In the past, when you didn't have this system, that was determined by the agency, and quite honestly, if you have a person that may not qualify really for that, but there's no other place to put them, and you're the agency, you're going to use that. And really, there's a person of higher need that's living in your canyons, on your river, and the alcove that needs that placement. Rapid rehousing is the next step, which we're trying to figure out how vulnerable can we work with on rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing for HUD can be up to 24 months. Typically, we want it 30 to 90 days, but for populations of domestic violence, transition age youth, and those with addiction, typically need a longer time, and 24 months is more likely. So the rapid rehousing is a rent subsidy and market rate apartments. The rent subsidy runs alongside them with services to match. As they self-sustain, those subsidies drop off, and then they're on their own. And the last is affordable and market rate housing, which is like the unicorn now. I don't know where you find these things, but that's the goal. And so I want to make sure all my electeds are staying focused on that, and the housing authority is staying focused on that. Right-sizing the system is what we call what I've just described. So we're trying to get balance so that we've got good pass-through, good flow and placement for the individual trying to serve. And I'm a systems guy, right? So I sometimes can get lost in the numbers and the efficiency. And that's why I work in partnership with great agencies that work with actual humans and can remind me of that every day. So here's some data that's generated from the system I described. From January 2015 to March 2016, we contacted 3,455 individuals. 2,700 were willing to take the intake. And then we do a kind of a cursory assessment. If they don't want to do the vulnerability index, we'll do an assessment quickly just so we make sure we still have them in the system. And then the highest, most vulnerable were 1,800. Medium vulnerability was 747. And then for low vulnerability, 141. And typically what I'm finding is it runs like this. So it's about 70, 30, 10 % for each of these how they're assessed, and then we use that to place. So those that are highest in that highest vulnerability may be a good placement for permanent supportive housing. Those that are in the medium, typically for rapid rehousing, may be a good match. One of the things that we're finding out, because this is all a learning process, is that even those that are in that 141, low vulnerability. So the big I, got the county and the city and Sutter to partner for a $2.5 million project. We're going to rapidly rehouse the folks that are of lowest vulnerability, they have the least barriers to getting to housing. So we thought, based on the assessment, well, guess what? We started referring people, and yeah, the guy's healthy, hasn't been homeless that long, but he's got many evictions. He's been arrested a number of times. These are still barriers to housing that we have to work with. So one of the solutions that came out was, what if we did congregate living, where the agency rents the house, there's 4 to 5 folks that live there with an on-site monitor, and now it's not the landlord dictating who's going to move in, but the agency that can start working with them. So I think around some of these problems, we just need to knuckle down and find solutions to it. This was some data that came off that at times is helpful when we're having conversations about funding. 86% of individuals assessed report a physical, mental, or emotional impairment. 67% visit a hospital emergency department within the last 6 months. 37% reported inpatient hospitalization within the past 6 months. And 56% have been homeless for 2 years or longer. About 2/3 of impact on community cost. In California, it's just over $2,600 a month is estimated per homeless individual. 2/3 of that is hospitalization. The other third is typically with the criminal justice system. And for us, of those that we've surveyed, they've self-identified as 80% having been at the jail and 25% having been in a penitentiary. And then I always get the question, where are these people coming from? They can't possibly have been from here, wherever here is. Any puddle jump place in America will always say they came from somewhere else. I was in Utah and they said, well, we think a lot of people come from California. I don't see a great outflow to Utah from California. That's fine. So 61%, I'm going to, the program here is de-identify somebody. 61% self-identified as being from Sacramento. They grew up there, they went to school there. The other 10% were from outside of, within the region. There was another 16% were within the state of California, and then 13% were, 16% were out of state, 13% were within state. And typically, if I were to survey community groups, I'd venture to guess out of state is probably even higher than that. Typically what we see is people come here for the same reasons all humans move about the earth, is for the hope of prosperity, love, a job that just didn't work out, and welcome to California. It's very expensive to live here. And then a list of where we find folks. 50% are street and sidewalk, another 25% or 21% along our riverways is very high. And you can kind of see these others. We also want to look at our system. So once we have it set up, right? So we've got outreach, we've got intake, we're doing referrals, we've got our silos starting to break down, so that now I'm working with my SHRA, the Housing Authority, I work with the county and the city. We meet every week to look at our operations. We all run, for instance, a rapid rehousing program. We need to make sure all of our policies are the same. We need to make sure that how long we're subsidizing folks is the same, so that people aren't shopping around to get the best deal. So we meet all the time to make sure that that's happening and to see where there's efficiencies. I hired a landlord liaison that goes out, has a real estate background, and just recruits landlords. And so we use her to help recruit for all systems. So where we can find efficiency and light causes, that's what we want to do. We looked at average length of stay, and then have started to set some goals around each one of our lengths of stay. But this is a nice way to start to illustrate to providers. I think it's good on 2 levels. One, money likes this. So we're putting together a deal. Sutter said we'll put up $5 million of match to private investors. And they want to raise $30 million over a course of 3 years. And they want to invest it in this model because it has measurables and it has outcomes. And so they're willing to do this, but the providers or the project has to achieve the outcomes that they said they would. So that's great, because now my providers are getting funded to do the things that are efficient along this continuum. And secondly, if it doesn't work, provider gets a chance to say, these are the things we need. We tried this. We tried rapid rehousing, and you know what? People have higher barriers to housing than we expected. So we're going to try congregate living. I can now go back to the funder and say, these are the outcomes, these are the reasons we didn't make it, these are the solutions we need, and this group's willing to continue to invest so long as that type of process is happening. So these measurables serve, for me, a purpose on many levels, one of which is the funding stream. Others, non-homeless prior to entry, I think the thing that surprised me the most, you'll see on the top left, out of coming into emergency shelters, 44% of families were in a house situation the day prior to coming into the shelter. That does not mean they were not imminently at risk of becoming homeless, but there was an opportunity with 44% for us to intervene and have a preventative measure, and we may not have needed to expand our family shelters. We may needed to expand and create a more coordinated prevention effort. So we want to keep an eye on this data because inflow is every bit as important as creating a better outflow. And around families, I think that we might have an impact there. Homeless prior to entry below, you can see some of the numbers there. Rate of exits to permanent housing. And I'll just go through these. These are just examples of things that you want to measure as you get your system up running. Rate of return to homelessness. So at emergency shelters, it's up at 7%, but the others are very low. Now, I want to qualify this. If a person goes into a program and it didn't work, so they returned to homelessness, and they never came back up into my system, they're not getting counted as of today. They could have gone to your county, they could have gone to the river and never returned to a system. So these only illustrate those that left, became homeless, and came back into our system. We looked at cost per exit, start to make the case for transitional housing. If we're getting the same outcomes with other models, how do we weigh that? Common sense was what we called the system I described because it seemed a lot cuter than Housing Crisis Resolution Center, and they got us better investment. So we looked at that. We looked at a diversion program, and this just kind of follows what I was mentioning about the families. And then coordinated exit, rapid rehousing. We're also with the Landlord Liaison. We hosted our first lunch with property owners on Thursday, and we had 70 folks there, and it's a great time for service providers to meet large landlords and start making those connections more so. In this rapid rehousing program, we did put a set aside for damages, so if something happens in the apartment, that beyond the damage deposit that we pay for. We have a 24-hour hotline in case mediation needs to occur. Sacramento Self-Help Housing will respond within 24 hours for mediation. So we want to keep our landlords whole, and as we do employment, we also want to keep our employers whole in the same vein. And then on the next steps is that we'll continue to look at our data and adjust our system accordingly. I will tell you, for all these great ideas, the culture of agencies and communities is really tough to change, right? It's really tough to get over. Certain agencies have pretty high barriers. They have expectations of sobriety. I mean, all of them make sense. I get it. But if we're going to serve this population, if you're going to get your most chronically homeless individuals off the street, those cannot be barriers to reaching that shelter, reaching that housing, and the services they need. So this concludes, I think, my presentation. I'd be happy to answer questions and talk to you about what other communities are doing, sir. Yes.
What is the annual cost per person served?
I don't know the annual cost. I know that the city of Sacramento spends impacts and services is $13.6 million. County of Sacramento, it's well over 40. And then for
40
those,
million?
yeah. And then coming into our system is just over 18 million from HUD, which pays for those that are housed tonight, that we house in permanent supportive housing, and the individuals that we're going to be working with throughout the
So
year.
what's the net cost to the county?
I think the county was at 40. They're coming out with the city already did it, it was 13.6. The county's in that process right now, and I haven't seen it, other than I have seen a report, it was around 40.
What, can you estimate a cost for Sutter County, or the size of this size,
No, I can't.
or even per person,
Per person, per housing, we estimate it's $9,500 in the rapid rehousing.
per year?
Yeah, but that's a one-time. So in that year, that one family or individual, it's roughly around that cost.
So in the millions anyway, $2 or
yeah.
$3 million, maybe
Yeah.
$5 million a year?
Yeah.
Excuse me, so, and how would it be funded? By the county's taxes?
It's usually a combination of your federal dollars that come in. So for us, we heavily rely on HUD. And then the county as well does the support services. And one of the challenges is that HUD typically only pays for the rent subsidy, right? So then it's left to the provider to go out and find the match for the services. And I was in a meeting today at 9 o'clock talking about that for, it's one of our programs, Mather. And they needed additional dollars for services that we were able to identify. So we took some of it out of our rapid rehousing fund, so they had enough services to maintain the program. Yeah. Questions? Just got any more questions? Fun topic. Yes.
How is Sacramento Steps Forward organized? Are you guys like a JPA, a nonprofit? How do you access those funds?
So we originally were designed to be a JPA. I left for 3 years and I came back. That wasn't the case. So we're a nonprofit. We're a 501c3. The contracts that are between HUD and the subrecipient, those were managed out of the Department of Human Assistance to the county. When the economy went sideways, they defunded that department, formed this nonprofit, and transferred those contracts over to Sacramento Steps Forward.
So you're a nonprofit controlled by Sacramento County?
No, we're an independent nonprofit.
Independent. And so HUD contracts with your organization directly?
Yes. Yeah. And you'll see that in a few other areas, but it's still pretty good.
Is that a model that can work in a community this size?
Yes. You know, one of the nice things is,
Because everything's
yeah,
by need.
right.
Sacramento has a huge need. In Sutter County, our need's going to be huge for us, but
Yeah.
maybe small in comparison to Sacramento. Do we have a chance to fly high enough on the radar to have that direct link with the HUD funding?
Yes, I think so. I mean,
I know these are questions I need to ask HUD, but.
No, that's fine. The application tends to build, if you will. So as you show success, it builds. And the programs that they require are pretty stringent. And then it's our job to enforce that. So I have a whole contracts team that's funded by HUD to go out and look at all the contracts, the files, financials, implementation. So it is possible. Most of them continue to run out of a government entity. We met with Contra Costa, it's run out of the Department of Health and Human Services, Santa Cruz, out of the office of the Executive Director for the county.
We have continuum of care, but it's, well, I want to speak to that, but we are a group of both city and county nonprofits. So.
Yeah, and you have your interagency council board. That was the structure that we had in the past. We had an interagency council board. That's how I started on that board. Department of Human Assistance actually managed the dollars. It's a requirement of HUD to have that board and have those community members at the table.
So for us to access a model like this, we might want to start with our continuum of care.
Absolutely, yeah, that's where it would come out, for sure. And these are, as you meet with your continuum of care partners throughout the U.S., especially in California, they'll refer to all of these, whether it's intake, whatever that looks like for the community. The VI SPDAT tool is a vulnerability index. It's the vulnerability index service prioritization decision assistance tool. Got that right, like the 10th time I tried to say it. That's a common tool, but there's others that other communities use. All of them have their challenges, but you need some way to start to sort through your population.
So you say you have HUD funding. Can you break down which types of HUD funding you have? The $18 million?
It's with the HEART Act.
So is it through ESG or is it through COC or is it?
COC.
And it's all through, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, our amount that we're able to get is so much lower than
You know, and what we should do is just set a meeting for you and myself and Michelle Watts.
That'd be great.
So I think all of us EDs have somebody that actually knows all the weeds and how everything connects. That's my Michelle Watts. And she actually lives in this community. So she could take a morning meeting and she wouldn't have to drive down to my shop for an hour. Yes, Ed.
Could you speak a little bit about the private business sector that you encounter? You spoke about the hospital and their willingness to participate. What about your smaller merchants throughout Sacramento County?
So the merchants, it's interesting because the Chamber of Commerce, and they do the walks, and I'm sure many of you have gone on these, and you go and survey your small merchants and your corporate ops, and they right now say the #1 issue is homelessness, that negative impact it has on their business district. So for us, they are able to collectively, through the assessment within a PBID, pay for their outreach, which is great. When I was at the Downtown Partnership, I used dollars to even pay for the interim housing. So I was housing people, queuing them up, and then finding market rate places to put them. And we work with the merchants every day in our outreach. If we go to the developer level, that's where we're looking at investment of funds in that collaborative private investment that Sutter is providing the matching dollar to. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned an interesting barrier that I think we all know about but hadn't thought of, perhaps, or I had, which was the landlords being a barrier to the entry of transition housing. And whether it be a criminal path, whatever barriers that the individual tenant is trying to come in. Because usually that sends red flags up that, okay, the place is going to be a bringing in a tenant that has a criminal past or whatever. The flag, you must be working with the potential tenants to some degree to get them to change their concept of ownership of a place and not rather than destroying the place, which is typical.
Yeah. So it's there's a program that we use for individuals that we're getting ready to place called Ready to Rent. It's a nationally recognized training, and it works with them on personal finances, works with them on what does it mean to be an individual renting a space, what are the relations you should have with your property owner. It's a very good training program. We'd be happy to share the contacts for that program. And then the other ones I mentioned as far as dollars for damage, trying to incentivize the idea of working with us. Because if you're renting at a poverty line and you look at the demographics between those in poverty and individuals that are homeless through rapid rehousing, if I didn't tell you which was homeless, you couldn't distinguish between the two populations. My population on housing, you get services attached, you get the other accoutrements that I just mentioned, plus they've been trained on how to rent a place. So the benefit of working with us as a continuum, I think, is higher than just taking the average application that comes in. The other thing that we look at, we started partnering with McGeorge School of Law. Many individuals have convictions and legal issues that they're holding on to that are hampering their chances to get housed. And our goal is to get those expunged and make them right so there's less barriers for them to get housed. Also working with the city attorney's office. Because, a lot of our folks get citations for like illegal use of the light rail system, peeing in an alcove, all those kind of minutia things. That once you get to the front door of an apartment, it's still count against you. So I'm asking if you're going to do a citation on, say, camping, it's fine. You do the camping citation, it's the first time, send them over to us. Let's let this guy get in line, do all the things he or she needs to do, and then if they do, expunge that first time ticket. If it's someone that's been cited a lot of times for just the kind of minutia of things, which I know is not always the case, right? So he got a peeing citation, but he also had a crack pipe. That scenario happens as well. If that's not the case, if it's smaller offenses, and I get to that front door, let's talk to the city attorney about not having those on their background.
So it's interesting, I just dealt with a tenant for over Yuba County, and the social worker that was helping them out, the first weekend after they moved in, sure enough, the texts light up that they're fighting at night, the weekend, this kind of thing. And the county stepped in right away and said, this is not how you do this. You need to, and they're backing it up with helping them get started with the rent and all that as well. But it's turning into a pretty positive experience.
Yeah.
So to the extent they're working it out.
I have a friend of mine in San Diego, and before I left, he purchases apartment complexes and refurbishes them, and I connect him with the continuum of care there. And since then, his revenues increased 20%. And it's small things, like they pay for the locksmith, they'll do minor plumbing repairs. He never has a vacancy. So for him, it's been a very good experience as well. Yeah. Other questions? Yes?
You didn't really mention, you mentioned folks with criminal histories, but what about homeless who are on probation or parole? Are the landlords, are they hesitant or willing, or how are they towards those who are under supervision?
Yeah, they're hesitant, and it's very difficult to get those folks housed. We do have property owners that have a history and a relationship with our providers. So there's trust there, and they are willing to take individuals in that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. But that's something that we're going to have to earn. So, yeah, it's tough. I mean, and, you know, these are the reasons why these individuals are homeless. I mean, so, yes.
You had mentioned, I thought, that if some of these people had substance abuse problems, that those had to be overlooked for this program to work. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when you say overlooked, what do you mean?
I mean, there's,
if you bring in an tenant who's
Yeah.
a drug abuser or has an alcohol problem and you let them move in and continue
Yeah.
with the drug abuse and the alcohol abuse.
yeah.
That seems a very difficult situation to put the other tenants in as well as the landlord.
Yeah, and I think it can be. But the agencies that are meant to assist these individuals need to stay close to that situation. But you're right, it can be tough. I'll tell you, when we did, it was called the Serial Inebriate Program. And this is when I ran the downtown partnership. So the idea was that we take our most chronically homeless individuals that were street alcoholics, and if they were arrested 25 times in 12 months, and I had some all-star, they knocked that out, nothing flat. And so that we would, they could either do, and this is not part of Housing First, but this is before we subscribed to it. It was either 180 days in jail or 90 days at detox, after which we would put them in a house. And there was no requirement that they had to stay sober. So for all that song and dance, we would put them in the house. And I thought, oh my God, this thing is going to implode. I even came up with some ways to kind of insulate us from when it did. It worked. Those guys stayed. Yes, they still drank, but they did not have a negative impact on neighborhood. They stayed in the house. And I went up to Seattle and looked at a program there that was an apartment complex built just for street alcoholics. And I kidded that you'd never build a college dorm like this. Because it had in the lobby, it had a recycled rubber tire floor so that if you fell, you wouldn't injure yourself. It had around-the-clock nurse care and food. In the room, there was a drain in the floor in case anything leaked. It had a fire alarm that you could smoke 1 cigarette's worth of smoke and it wouldn't go off. The burners on the stove turned off after a certain amount of time. And you know what? They had less visits to emergency rooms. They had higher incident going to their primary care. They weren't being arrested in public. There is a high mortality rate amongst that population. And there were those that sought sobriety that lived, and they had upper floors where those individuals lived. And they then started doing mentoring with the other portion of the population. It is not easy. And there are instances where people get placed and it does not work out. And the narcotics is much more difficult than alcohol. So those are realities, but if we don't, these are individuals that are not going to go in and they will die on the street. The lifespan of a person that's homeless for a long period of time, it's said is cut down by about a third. So that would be a reality if we don't use this methodology to get them out. Other questions? Yes.
I'm curious about how this works when you're gathering your data and looking at everything in domestic violence and the Housing First go down as far as lethality and the batterers finding down that type of thing. How does that work out for you?
Yeah, we have, so Weave is one of our providers for domestic violence. Their data has to be kept separate. There's a lot of rules and privacy around those, that domestic violence is the cause of their homelessness.
Right.
So all of those agencies follow the guidelines to try to protect those that are in that state.
So how do you get them housed through Housing First and without there being the lethality risk, the security risk? Or do they participate in this? Are they not?
They do, and we have programs that are specifically designed to assist that portion of the population, and it's not as robust as it needs to be. But their information isn't put out to the world either about who they are or where they're being housed. Mm-hmm. So that's kept private within our own organization. You couldn't call our office and say, hey, where's John Smith? So we do keep that private, and those names are at a whole different level as far as the privacy we have to keep for domestic violence.
And I think for me, the question is because I run the equivalent of we here in our area. Sure. And so when we're looking at how this is going to impact our women and children, because we do, it's a number one big cause for homelessness for women and children, and we're looking at the guidelines and the way that this is coming down and the move to where emergency shelters are being, in many ways, put out of business. How is that going to work when we're talking about this type of security risk? therein lies my concern.
When you say go out, what's the driving factor for that? When you say go out of business, why?
What we're hearing is that what we're seeing is less and less money are being put into emergency shelters, they're
Yeah.
only going to housing first.
Yeah, from the federal government, you're absolutely right.
And so that's what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
we're losing
Yeah.
money, and it's just
Yeah.
going away.
Yeah.
And so now the population that we serve does not have access to shelter money.
Yeah.
And this particular Housing First, looking at it, is not only not safe for the woman and for her children, but it's also not safe for the landlord, it's not safe for the community, because that isn't very good at finding.
Sure.
And so that's what I'm just wondering, if there's something that y'all have been able to do that mitigates that.
You know, it's not, I gotta tell you, that the conversation hasn't come up to our table. But let me have you talk with Manjeet with our office, and she manages all the privacy and policing for our data. She might be a good person to talk to. And then we do have, and you probably know, our providers as well that provide this type of care, but that would be worthwhile. I mean, part of what I like about coming and talking to other communities is that I do think we should be communicating with each other. We may find a solution to one piece of this, you may find it for another. You have a concern that we haven't even considered, so I think that's a valid conversation. But I don't have a clean answer for you, I don't know. Yes, sir.
And this Housing First, I heard that, what I'm hearing that you put them there, and then you're gonna provide the service, offer the services, right? But you cannot mandate they would break the service, correct?
Correct.
So what if a client goes in and then reject the service that you're offering, and for whatever reason is not in compliance with maybe like creating a chaos in that area, but it's not able to maintain the apartment. So what's the line? When do you have to get them moved out, and how does it work? How do you handle that?
If it's permanent supportive housing, then the service never leaves. It goes on forever. And if a person is severely disabled or at least qualifies for that program, then they're in that program ongoing. But they're treated no different than you would treat any of you. I mean, I know behind my door, I have a beer at night, I drink. No one's going to tell me that I can't. I enjoy the choices I get to make in my life, and that's what we offer these folks as well. Now, I also can't cause a disturbance in my neighborhood. I can't burn down the house. I mean, so I'm held to the same accountability as individuals that we're housing. But they all offer the services, and oftentimes people do take the services. I know on the surface it seems like they're not going to take it, but they do. And we also see in our data on the individuals working around mental health and addiction, they are seeking assistance with their mental health and also with addiction. It's very common. I'm telling you, when this stuff first came out years ago, I was like, this is never going to work. This housing first thing, I was totally opposed to it. But I'll also say this. When I was trying to get my most chronically homeless into the housing, kind of earn your right to housing models, they're like, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to a program. I'm not going to do that. They've done that many times and failed, and they're not going to go into those areas. Yes.
What do you do about the pets?
Man, right?
There
are days when I'm like, how much do I have to house? I got to house like the bird, the tree, the pet, the guy, the partner, his friend. Yes, so the pets are part of it. Even within our own shelters, it needs to be pet friendly. The one nice thing about congregate living is typically at a house where they can have pets. John Foley with Sac Self-Help Housing, he does that. He's able to accomplish that where we can have pets there. But the pets are real. I mean, those canine companions, and it's not just dogs, it's cats, it's birds, it's all that, but especially the dogs and cats. So
pit bulls and chihuahuas here.
Yes, and then you have landlords that say, well, I would take the pit bull, but my insurance says I can't. You're like, all right, that's why I need McGeorge School of Law, help me out. But that's often a barrier to housing. You're right. Yes.
Can I ask a question to kind of expand on what you were saying? We hear a lot, I work for the housing authority.
Yeah.
We hear a lot of discussion about homeless individuals who are service resistant.
Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing that? Or what I'm hearing more lately is that when given the opportunity to access services in housing, people are taking the opportunity to plug in. Can you respond to that?
Unfortunately, there are those that will pass away in their homelessness. there's a reality of that. The majority of the folks that we work with want to be housed. So I showed a slide, I think it was 3,000 some folks we contacted, and over 2,700 said, I'll take the interview, I'm interested in housing. So to me, that shows some initiative towards the desire to be housed. That's not uncommon. With David, who was homeless for 8 years, works for me, addiction was his driving factor for homelessness. When he could address that, when he could start to work with somebody that connected with him, he started to make choices that led to him being housed. So it's an individual process, but I don't think that we're not in a situation where we've got vacant units because people don't want to go on. I think it's a great conversation to have one day when I'm like, I got 5 units, I got 10 people, and I can't fill them. That's just not the case right now. I got people that want to be in housing. So yes, we do come across folks that are resistant for a number of reasons, but usually it's because they have a significant addiction that they're addressing every day, or a mental health issue that's complicating their ability to start to make those decisions. I don't find many that are sitting in their cool living room today saying, I'd like to live outside 105 degrees. That's just not, that's not a reality very often. Yeah.
Sacramento was interested, or at least paid attention to, tent cities. Other communities have small houses. Humboldt County has some cargo containers they've converted.
Yeah.
What's your experience with using that kind of less than permanent housing for the homeless?
Well, I think it's a, so you do need within your pipeline from contact to placement, you do need a capacity for shelter. What that looks like, you can kind of define. What I worry about in some communities, once they create the shelter, they think they're done. They're like, hey, we created a tent city. We did it. You haven't done it. You reshuffled the deck. Your people aren't in front of your store. Well, some aren't, but they're every bit as homeless. So whatever that looks like, the shelter system, it has to have a connection with your coordinated entry. It has to have a connection to housing. It has to have services there to assist people. It has to be connected to this pipeline. So from point of contact to evaluation, being queued up in place, that has to function as a tool of that system. So I'm less worried about whether it's a tube, a dome, a ship, an inflatable thing. I've heard every combination of how to put a human under a roof and walls. Eventually you got to put them into a house. So I would just caution communities, as you look at your shelter systems, that's fine. They should be brought to scale that matches your flow into your housing, but you have to have the housing. You got to figure that out. Yes, sir.
I think that's a question that I think has come up. What if you don't have the housing available? Does that mean you can't go any further because you don't have the housing?
I know, right? This is the question to answer.
I mean, really, if you don't have the housing, the program doesn't even start.
Yeah, because we're at a, what's your vacancy rate right now? We're just around 2.4.
I don't know what it is,
but is under 2.
Low-cost housing is non-existent here.
Yeah. So
much less free housing.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I have seen, we looked at Olympia, because when we visited Seattle, I went over to Olympia and looked at a program there. They use the small housing model. We had 2 programs years ago we put in. One was MLK, another one is Quinn Cottages. And they're permanent housing. So you can do it. I mean, it's a permanent house. And it runs under our permanent supportive housing programs. They work. You can get community to, work with you to site those spots. That's usually your biggest problem. So, but it has to be a permanent spot. I mean, so we can't kid ourselves and try to game the system to say, if we do something less than that we've solved homelessness. You lose momentum, you lose speed, you lose your funding, and I guarantee if you're looking for HUD dollars, they're not paying for that. Yes?
It kind of connected with that last question. You hit on it and then kind of didn't answer. How do you deal with the landlord that, small landlord has the insurance issue with pets? Most of them have pets, and the pit bull is a definite no from the small landlord's insurance policy. It's a showstopper.
Oh, it's.
How do you get around that?
Sometimes you don't. Sometimes that's a landlord you just can't work with it, and it's true. I've got landlords that there's a portion of the population that they're not housing.
So you find landlords that have insurance that do allow that?
We have, yeah. Now the congregant living is Sacramento Self-Help Housing actually leases the house. So it'd be just like me renting a house and I've got roommates. I can have a pet there. I can, live in the quiet enjoyment of my house. So in that environment, it's easier to house people with higher barriers to housing and with their pets. For the apartments, it's very difficult. It has been difficult. But it's been done. We had Janice housed her and her 3 or 4 dogs. And the funniest thing was we needed a much higher pet deposit that we didn't have because it wasn't part of HUD's dollars. And it took, I think we got it in less than 10 minutes. The shelter put it on the website, the pet shelter put it on the website, and within 5 or 10 minutes, that funding came in. I swear it'd be easier to fund this stuff if we were housing like pets and their owners. Housing homeless pets and their owners has sometimes a much more sympathetic response than the humans are. So sometimes it just doesn't happen because they're not going to let it happen. Other times you have a good relationship and they'll allow it. Or there are situations where it's really not in the control of the property owner.
Can you talk a little bit about progressive engagement and how you engage with those people who are most vulnerable and least likely to connect to services? Because that's going to be a hard thing.
So the progressive engagement, I'm going to admit I'm still learning progressive engagement a little bit. So there's when I show there's high vulnerable, mid vulnerable, and higher functioning, there's those that are on that cusp between highly vulnerable and mid-range. And while they may qualify for permanent supportive housing, there's not enough stock. I only have a 13% outflow in my permanent supportive housing, which is less than 300 units a year. And I have far more individuals than that. So we can use rapid rehousing, but we need to stay with that person and continue to watch to see if that's going to be a successful model. They don't lose, another part of this is, let's say you put somebody in transitional housing, they lose their chronic homeless status. So now they can't go into permanent housing. If they're in rapid rehousing, they don't lose that chronic homeless status. So we can work with them to see if it's going to sustain, if they're going to be able to sustain. If after a period of time they don't, they still qualify for your permanent supportive housing stuff. All of that's easy to stay, but if you've only got a 13% outflow, you still don't have enough permanent supportive housing stock to place. But in that type of engagement, we are looking at that. We haven't quite done it yet, but that is, we're all going to have to look at that model. Yeah.
Because those, I just know that population that is deep in the river and they don't want to come out for services, but those are the most needing services.
Yep.
And how, I mean.
That's why I like the Navigation Center. That's the one thing I do. I really like San Francisco's Navigation Center. They'll take street family units and bring them in all at once. And I think there's a greater incentive, because we have done that a few times in the past. If they can all come together with their pets, there's a higher likelihood that they'll do so. Other questions? I got 2 more questions. Sir.
So the engagement piece is huge.
Yes.
In getting the folks who are almost to trust. What's the average time? And we've been making this effort for the last few months.
Are you asking the length of time from point of contact to housing, or
just the engagement of the individual to accept the help?
You know, I've never measured that. I would only say that it can range from today, it's just, it hits and it works, to sometimes it just doesn't. But usually, over time, it does. It just depends on the individual. It also depends on your outreach. So for veterans, I hire veterans. For transition age youth, typically they work better with transition youth, people they can identify with. That's your question.
You know, the governor's and the Senate's initiative about taking some of the mental health thing.
Daily on money.
For the homeless shelter. How's that going to impact your program?
Well, hopefully it'll give us more capacity. I'm hoping that we can apply for those dollars and build more capacity for housing. So that's the hope.
Well, see, in the Yuba City area, when you're talking about taking that money from the county in the mental health program already, that doesn't have enough money. And then you're going to say, and you have to spend it on this, and you have to compete for that money to begin with. And so we may be losing money that we never will see. And even if we see it and build the housing, now we have to maintain it, operate it. And so that basically forces us to spend money to do all that when we would maybe have chosen to spend that money differently.
Yeah. Have you talked to the Steinberg Institute at all? It might be just an interesting conversation. Because Darrell Steinberg was the author of the original Prop 63, MHA 6, and he's been the author here of the recent De Leon bill. And in my conversations with him, who I would consider the authority on how those dollars are being allocated, that might be just an interesting conversation to see what the rationale is. Yeah. All right. If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to leave my card. You're welcome to give me a call. The drive wasn't so bad. But I want to thank all of you for being interested and having a conversation. You have a lot. I have questions. If I was in your seat, I'd have questions because there's things we're trying to solve. We're 10 minutes ahead of doing this stuff. And we just got these systems in place. I said in the last 12 months, I went from 5 staff to 35. We're putting systems in place as fast as we can, as reasonable as we can. So we're learning as we go. So I would say it's a good thing to stay in touch with us because we're making mistakes every day and learning from them that you never have to make that mistake. I certainly do the same thing with LA. But I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for coming, and thanks, Steve, for use of your facility here. And there are cookies out here for everybody?
Yeah, just down the street, Ed.